Okay, hello everyone. Today is November 9th. This is Velero committee meeting. And first, let me update some status. So for 1.9.3, we are planning to grade RC2 today on November 9th. Because we have adopted the new method to scan CVEs, and so we need to and so we need to fix more CVEs. That is, we have scanned more CVEs, so we need to fix them. And particularly, we want to compile RASIC, by ourselves to with the newer Go library, so that we can fix quite some of the CVEs. And that means we need to adopt the new make method, and that takes some time. So we decided to create RC2 for 1.9.3. And currently most work has been done. So we will be able to create RC2 today. And for 1.10, we will we also plan to release RC1 today, and but we will decide whether we need to shape all the changes in 1.9.3 directly. If yes, we may need to take some time, maybe 1 or 2 days, to wait for the changes ready. If not, we will directly cut the branch today. Okay, that's the overall status. Personally, I'm working on a manual test for way 1.10, and I also make some preparations like the release notes and document changes. That's from my side for personal update. And the next one, Jiangjun, please.
I have done the 1.10 and the 1.9 and 0.3 manual test cases. And this week I will be supporting the community issue. And I also do some PR reviews in the past of weeks. And that's all.
Okay, thanks. And Jimin.
First, I'm doing the 110 and the 193 manual test. Second, I'm enable dependable for security issue check and fix. Third, releasing 193 RC2, which mainly focus on Golang runtime CVE fix by bump up Golang version to 118, and we compile Velero and Ristic by a new higher Golang version. Yeah, that is from my side.
Yeah. By the way, the Ristic version is not changed, but we recompile it ourselves by a new Golang version. Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, me. And Scott.
Yeah. So the main thing that's still open is that async action plugin design. There were some comments last week. I responded to those. In some cases, I made modifications to fix some of the problems identified. There's one open question still. I believe it was Daniel that suggested he thought there was some confusion because one of the fields in the operation progress, or there's two fields, there's two integer fields as items completed and items to complete. So there's a total amount done and total the amount done so far and the total amount done. And I think part of the confusion is it's kind of up to the plugin what those numbers, like the units are, because if you're doing if we're talking about a PV, then you're probably talking about bytes or kilobytes or something like that. But if it's some other kind of plugin, it might mean something completely different. So Daniel had suggested, instead of having those two fields, to say, okay, 5 out of 10 or 300 out of 5,000 done, just have a string field where the plugin would provide that, in a user visible text. That's, so you could say 3 kilobytes out of 1.2 gigabytes completed or something like that. So I think if anyone else can comment as to which you think is better. I don't have a strong opinion here. I think I'm fine with either approach. The only disadvantage to the string approach is it means Velero is not going to be trying to parse that string. So, we're not going to be reporting percentages. We just need to read the string. But that's probably okay. So if anyone else has any opinions as to whether they prefer it the way it's in the design doc, or they'd rather take Daniel's suggestion and use a string field instead of those two fields, just include that in the review, and we can kind of figure out what makes sense. I'm open to either one. I don't really have a strong opinion, so kind of whatever the consensus is fine for me on that particular question.
Personally, I don't have a very clear background of the discussion,
Okay.
but we do have a place that showing the percentage. That is, if we describe a backup with
that's showing
details.
percentage of the backup itself. That's true, but that's a different number, because that would be, that's where if you have 5,000 resources we're backing up, and we've completed 200 of those 5,000. These are numbers for a single item. So for example, if this is a data mover backup item action, where you have a 3 gigabyte volume that we're uploading to cloud storage from the data mover, these fields would be showing 2 kilobytes out of 3 gigabytes completed. And so those numbers are in the context not of the overall backup, but in in other words, it's progress for a single item action, not progress for the backup as a whole. So we don't currently have any reporting for that anyway. So this will be new reporting anyway. So at the most, we'd be showing some information for each item, so we could, in theory, just display those strings. I don't know that the percentages would matter that much, because we can't necessarily aggregate them across all of the items anyway, because the units might not be the same, because you might have one item action that's a volume item action, and so we're talking about gigabytes of data involved here, and you might have another item action that's a completely different action that where those numbers mean something else. So I don't know that Velero would be aggregating these numbers anyway. It's more likely they would just be log messages, or possibly status field fill-in information. So I don't know that there's a huge advantage either way. But the context here is that when Velero calls back to the plugin to say, hey, give me progress, is this done? What matters really to the Velero controller is not that status field. Velero just wants to know the Boolean, is this done or not, and was there an error? If it's done and there's an error, we move the backup. Then we log that as an error on the backup partially failed. If it's done, there's no error, then it's completed. And if it's not done, then we're still in that state of waiting for plugin operations. So the actual progress fields, the two individual integer fields as defined in the design now, or if we replace that with a single string field, those aren't going to be used by Velero really anywhere other than possibly logging that value, or possibly adding it to a status field. So I don't know that it's a huge important question, from Velero. But if anyone wants to look at Daniel's comments and then the response, and then I kind of summarized kind of the decision to make kind of in my final comment on the PR.
Yeah. So the question is, if we have a place that to show the percentage for backup, but if we have multiple in parallel backup item actions, so how do we calculate the entire percentage? Because
and I don't even know that we would need to or want to calculate that, because again, I don't think we can, because we could have different kinds of of plugins anyway. So even if we had those integer numbers, I don't think we can. It wouldn't be really meaningful to add all those things up. I think at the Velero backup level, all we really care about is how many actions are completed versus not completed, and so and for that information, we just need that Boolean field. This is something that's probably going to be embedded in a log somewhere or in a status field. It's not something we're going to be adding up over the whole backup, because I don't think that would be very meaningful to an end user as a number.
Yeah, if we focus on the data mover scenarios only for the BI or I, so if users have for example, 5 GB of data to back up, and that will that scattered in, for example, 10 volumes, and that will take, for example, half an hour. Or we have 1 TB of data that will take 1 hour, right? So users, well, it's a good idea to show a percentage for users, right?
I mean, you could show the percentage for each one if we kept that. I mean, and that was kind of my thinking of keeping the values as they were. But Daniel was concerned that it would be confusing to users if we left it that way. Another possibility I didn't mention in the PR is if the objection was, hey, I don't know what these numbers mean because it might mean bytes in this plugin, it might mean something completely different in another plugin. Another thing we could do is add a third field, which would be like a description field or a unit field. So we could say, what do these means? Because we have 2 integer fields saying total and completed. And then we could have another field that's saying, what is this thing? What's the unit? And that would be bytes, for example, for data mover. And it might be something else. It might be, I don't know, number of something. I just don't know, because we don't really have ready-made use cases for this other than right now data mover and volume snapshotters. And in those cases, we're talking about volumes where bytes make sense. But we intentionally made this flexible enough so that if someone wants to make a plugin for actions that are moving some other kind of data that's not volume data, there might be a different unit of measure that makes sense there. So what we could do is leave those fields, items completed and items total, or whatever those are, and add a third field that says items unit, which allows the plugin to specify what this means. That way, if we decide to aggregate them, and from a Velero point of view, we'd only aggregate them if they were all the same. So if you had 5 actions that were copying volumes and those were all in bytes, we could add all those up. And if you had some other plugin that had a completely different thing it was doing with a different unit, that would be a different category. So that's another thing we could do, is leave the 2 fields there, as integers, and then just add a new field to that struct that will clarify what it is we're measuring. So I think part of the issue that Daniel had was it was items completed and items, and I think he thought it was confusing because we also use items, for example, to refer to resources, Kubernetes resources, and in this case they are not Kubernetes resources, because we're in the data mover, we're moving bytes, we're moving data on a volume. So the progress for a volume is not the number of Kubernetes resources we've moved, but the amount of data we've moved.
Yeah, I think generally in the design we want to make this background operation by BIA generic. So by generic, for a generic operation, the progress may be represented in different ways.
Right.
They may be represented in bytes, in unit, in items, or maybe the progress cannot be represented by just 2 numbers. So given we want this flexibility to make the operation generic, we should also provide a flexible way to let user decide how they represent the progress.
I mean, if we did that and just got rid of the 2 numbers and then just use a string, and then I think in the data mover use case, what that would mean is the data mover will so for example, if you had 10 megabytes out of 3 gigabytes completed, with the integers you would put in however many bytes those amounted to in those fields. But with the string, you would just generate the string that's human readable that says 10 megabytes out of 3.0 gigabytes completed, and that would get logged or put on a status or something, and that would just be human readable. And what we would not be doing if we took that approach is Velero would not add all these things up across all the actions. But I think that's probably okay.
I would say that with the string approach, it's still possible. For example, we can document that you need to represent the string as a JSON. And if you want Velero's controller to parse it correctly, the JSON has to be in a certain format. So that for the data mover case, we can parse the JSON string in the backup controller. So Velero is still, able to do the calculation for data mover. For other generic operation that Velero does not understand, you can, write any string and we just put it in the log. So in that way, we have enough flexibility to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would be concerned that would be a lot. I mean, that might make it more confusing because then you have this kind of string that could be freeform, but it might have data, and then Velero's going to parse it, and then we have parse error issues. I mean, I think so. I mean, I think if we want to calculate this, I think we want to. It might be better to, it maybe even leave the integer fields there, but leave them as optional. So a plugin that's not going to make a calculatable progress can use a string field. That will never be parsed, and so maybe we leave both fields. We have the numbers that represent bytes as fields, and then we have a string description of progress. And a plugin can use both or use one or the other, but the only thing that Velero will ever parse would be the ones representing bytes.
Yeah, I think that will also work. But in that case, if we use two numbers, we should clearly document that these numbers are the completed bytes versus total bytes.
I think that's right. So maybe instead of items completed, we can say bytes completed, bytes total, and then we have a description. And then make it clear in the API definition that, the bytes part is optional. And if it's an integer that you leave blank, it just shows up as 0, but it won't show up. 0 out of 0, Velero knows, okay, if the total is 0, it means we're not parsing this. It's not something that the plugin has supplied. But we have an integer description, so we have a string description of, progress description or something, which will allow the plugin to describe in a human readable way what's been done, what's left, whatever. So in that case, I think sounds like if we're agreeing on that, I think that means there's two changes to the current design. One is that we change the names of those fields to say bytes instead of items to make it clear. A second would be to add a description field. So a plugin could choose to use a description field instead of the bytes fields. Does that work?
I think that works, but personally, I prefer the JSON approach. But yeah, I think I'll let other guys comment.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I guess my thing with the JSON approach is that, if all we're doing is the bytes, parsing for the data mover and volume snapshotter case, I think that's adding parsing overhead that we don't need to add when it's just right there.
Yeah.
The standard case is going to be bytes, and in the case where it's not bytes, we don't even have a defined use case right now for what it would look like, and we don't want Velero to have to parse something that we're not clear on what we're using yet.
I understand, but the JSON approach, you can extend to other cases once they emerge, right? I mean, we just write some code in Velero to try to parse the JSON in a different way to understand what's going on. But yeah, I don't have a very strong opinion. I think either will work.
Okay, I'll update the design. But hopefully we're at the point now, especially now that I know we're going to be doing we're going to be making that 110 release branch this week, which means basically as soon as we can get these designs approved, we can start implementing some of these things in the 111 for the 111 timeframe, because those can then be merged once we have the 110 release branch. So hopefully once we get this resolved and figure out kind of and agree on what we want this to look like, maybe we can be at a point where we can finalize this and say, okay, this is approved. The follow-on designs, the plugin versioning API designs, should be easier to review once this design is approved, because it's basically just the proto buff code and kind of design for what each one looks like. So I think those should be relatively straightforward, but let's focus on getting the main one merged first, and then we can look at the others, because any changes, for example, that I'm making to this operation progress that we're talking about, that's going to change those design PRs as well, because that's where those are spelled out in more detail.
Yeah.
And I'll just mention it briefly. We don't need to go into it yet because again, this kind of follows on from the other. But I now have 2 PRs out there, draft PRs, for what the implementation would look like for the backup item action, restore item action V2. And again, those are going to change with any changes in the designs, so they're not really ready for view or merging yet.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot. And Wenkai.
Yeah. The only item I'm working on for OS at Velero is the one-time manual testing.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Wenkai. So that's all for the update. So are there any discussion topics today? Or is there anything any other things we want to discuss? Product things or anything else? Okay. If not, I think we can finish off here today. So thanks everyone. Have a good day and a good evening. Thanks.
Thanks, folks. Bye.
Bye-bye.